Bill sponsors here, so we'll go ahead and get to rolling. Call to order the first joint meeting of the House and Senate Appropriations and Revenue Committees. Today's hearing will be for information only. The intent is we will take testimony on House Bill 1, but also hear from the Senate sponsor, as they are both identical bills, but we will not cast any votes today. But for the purposes of the meeting, we do need to have roll taken differently. So, Madam Secretary, if you would, please, for the Senate, call the roll.
Senator Carroll.
Here.
Senator Caslin. Senator Douglas.
Here.
Senator Givens.
Here.
Senator Kerr.
Here.
Senator McGarvey.
Here.
Senator Meredith.
Here.
Senator Nemes.
Present.
Senator Webb. Senator West.
Here.
Chair McDaniel.
Here, the Senate has a quorum and is duly constituted to conduct business, and I will yield to the House Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, will you call the House roll, please?
Representative Beckler.
Here.
Representative Bentley.
Here.
Representative Blanton.
Here.
Representative Bridges.
Here.
Representative Dossett.
Present.
Representative Fisher.
Here.
Representative Fleming.
Present.
Representative Flood.
Here.
Representative Fugit.
Here.
Representative Gentry.
Here.
Representative Hale.
Here.
Representative Hart.
Here.
Representative Hatton. Representative McCool.
Here.
Representative Nemes.
Here.
Representative Palumbo.
Here.
Representative Prunty.
Here.
Representative Raymond. Representative Riley. Representative Santoro. Representative Tipton.
Here.
Representative Wilner. Vice Chair Reed.
Here.
Chair Petrie.
We are here. The House has a quorum and ready to conduct business. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, welcome. If you guys like to both identify yourselves for the record and proceed with testimony on House and Senate Bill 1.
I'm Robert Stivers. I represent the 25th Senate District, which is now Jackson, Owsley, Clay, Knox, Whitley, and McQuarrie counties. But I have represented Leslie in the past, Wolf in the past, McGoffin in the past, Morgan in the past. I don't think all of those are in the declaration zone, but they are all close, and many of them, and Lee. One of my counties had loss of life, Clay. Another was designated, I think, Owsley, as they were impacted by the events, which I think are now right at 4 weeks from its occurrence.
I'm John Blanton, and I represent House District 92, which includes McGoffin, Knott, and a big portion of Pike County. All three of my counties are in the designated declaration of emergency. Knott County has sustained the highest number of fatalities for a single county throughout the region, with 18 individuals, including 4 children, that lost their lives.
If I can, Mr. Chairman, members of both committees, or Mr. Chairman and Mr. Chairman, I want to talk a little bit about the process and what has occurred, and what we tried to stay fairly disciplined. Particularly on our side, I want to thank you and Senator Givens. I'm not exactly sure where he is. We started early having discussions, I think that Thursday and Friday after the rain hit and the events occurred. We're on conference calls with the governor's office and then with the House. We started talking about what had occurred with the bill, with the Western Kentucky SAVE Act, and the extent and the differences, and there are differences that have occurred. One, the timing and close proximity to the session made it a lot different in dealing with this situation because we had information A little closer? Okay. Is that better? I'm generally pretty good at projecting. I try to be silent, but my kids always told me I was really good at projecting. But a little bit different when you do the assessments because not diminishing in any way. When you saw where the tornado hit, you pretty much knew a lot of the damage because the building was like gone. You go to Buckhorn School where they had 6 feet of water in it. You really don't know what the extent of the damage is, and the damage isn't really known yet. And I think that's probably a pretty good assessment, Representative Fugit, but there is the potential it could be saved, or it may have to be totally torn down, depending on mold, contagion, things that were in the water, structural damage underneath. And we're 4 months away from the session, too. So a different approach to this than what was done in Western Kentucky. We wanted to primarily focus on Western Kentucky, but if there was need, or not Western Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, but if there was a need and there was one slight deviation, even though we wanted to focus on this, we wanted to determine what the short-term objectives are because it's going to take a little bit longer to come up with the long-term impacts. And so that's what we have taken through this process about how we focus on the infrastructure of cities and counties, the school boards, the other quasi-governmental entities, be it fire departments. Some fire departments, I think, lost all their equipment. Water districts. So that's to get them back up and running. And as you know, Mr. Senate Chair, Senator McDaniel, we listened to several of the governmental entities talk about how they no longer had money in the bank. This fiscal liquidity when they've been paying for overtime, gravels, culverts, tiles, equipment that had to be brought in, contractors. It has created a fiscal strain on their budgets and basically almost at zero balance. So I want to bring this one thing back to the West Kentucky because of the sequence of events related to the timing of sending out bills for property tax and how the budgets are addressed. This won't be something you will see for Eastern Kentucky because the property tax assessments and bills have been sent out and collected. It may become an issue in future years because I have no doubt in my mind that there will be substantial value reduction in a lot of pieces of property because any type of increased valuation due to structures is going to be removed because a lot of the structures are no longer there. So what you will see in this bill is one place that we do open up the West Kentucky SAFE Act to do some stopgap measures where school systems have lost some revenue if they can show it was due to the damage related to the tornadoes because of lost property valuation and lack of ability to collect the receipts. Other than that, this is very similar to what we passed in both chambers in the last session, but knowing that we may have to relook at the total circumstances when we get to the regular session because the assessments just are not complete or even close to being complete at this time.
Mr. Chairman, I will go into the explaining of House Bill 1 here just briefly, if you would indulge me, that I may paint a picture very briefly for us. We've all heard, we've all seen pictures. Some of you all have come to the region to see, to help with recovery and with damages. I will tell you, having seen it on the ground firsthand in my muck boots and from the air, delivering MREs and water to areas where people could not get access to food. If you see it on the ground in person, it's worse than you're imagining right now, I promise you. You may see the pictures, but you don't get the smells, you don't get the sounds, you don't get any of those things. When I deliver a bottle of cold water to a lady and she breaks down and cries to get her hands on a bottle of cold water. Someone said, why are you taking MREs to those people? Sure, they got enough food in their house to live for a few days. Well, not everybody lives like someone else. There are some people that has only enough to get by day. And these people were living on MREs. And if you've ever eaten them, I can tell you they're not the best meal that you ever eat. But they were glad to get them. They were glad to get them. So our people have been suffering. But in the middle of all that destruction and damage, I go in my side-by-side delivering meals to places we couldn't get regular vehicles. I go to houses and they'd say, well, we've got food. Take it to someone that doesn't need, that needs it worse than I do. On a trip up one hollow, Mr. Chairman, delivering meals, when I came out of that hollow, I came out with my side-by-side full of water and bottles of bleach. They had extra. They wanted it sent to the distribution centers to make sure others had what they needed. East Kentucky people are strong, we're proud, we're resilient. I've had 70 and 80-year-old men and women break down and cry, not wanting to go to FEMA and ask for help because they've never ever had to ask for help in their life. They just didn't want to do it, but they had no other choice. So until you've been there, not for photo ops, but actually down on the boots on the ground working it. And many of us here, many of our mountain legislators have been in it since day one. Even Sharon, Representative Hatton, our homes, you opened up for people in need. So we come to you in a time asking for assistance that we've been devastated unlike any time in any of our lifetimes. This is the first step, in my opinion. As we continue to assess, we're going to see more and more needs come down. And we have to be willing as a body, just as we are now, to come together and address those needs to ensure that these people are taken care of. That's our commitment we have to make to each of them. So with that, I thank you for the indulgence, and I will begin laying out the House Bill 1. House Bill 1 will, first of all, it will set up and establish the East Kentucky State Aid Funding for Emergencies. Hereafter will be called East Kentucky SAFE. That will set up and provide for financial support to local areas that's been named in the Presidential Declaration of FEMA in the Eastern Kentucky region due to the impacted July 22nd storms and flooding. The eligible individuals, groups for this to receive financial support from EKSEF include city, county, urban government, consolidated local government, unified local government, or charter county governments, nonprofit or public utility service providers, state agencies, or school districts, and the financial support shall not cover any new construction inside the 100-year floodplain. Also in it, as mentioned, we addressed some issues in the West Kentucky tornadoes. That was called SAFE. It's been renamed to WK SAFE, West Kentucky SAFE, so we can identify the two separate entities. There will be $200 million that will be put into East Kentucky SAFE to be distributed out, appropriated as follows. Initially, $75 million of appropriation for fiscal year 2023 will go into from EK SAFE to military affairs to provide for emergency management. You see the things they're doing on the ground to continue to do those things. An appropriation of $40 million will go to the Operation and Support Services of the Department of Education. And this is support schools with cleanup, with repairs, wraparound services for students, mental health support, whatever they may need in the schools. Another appropriation of $45 million will go into the highways within the Transportation Cabinet. That is monies above and beyond the regular budget to help with emergency repairs that was incurred during the flooding. The appropriation for highways may be increased for expenditures relating to the response and recovery from the flooding if necessary. And then we will appropriate $12.6 million from the state physical fund of ARPA, which will deplete the ARPA funds that we have for the fiscal year 2023. And then the way it will work, any of these entities that receives funding that has insurance or makes FEMA claims, then once they're reimbursed by FEMA or the insurance company, they will then in turn reimburse the states for those fundings. Now, with that said, I will put out an example. If, let's say there's $100 million in damage, and FEMA awards them $75 million in damage, and we've gave them $100 million to prepare, and that may be too high numbers, but I'm just using numbers for numbers' sake, right? So we've gave them $100 million. FEMA only reimburses them $75 million. Then they will reimburse us the $75 million to go back into this fund, and the other $25 is part of the state's part in paying that. So they will not be out any monies on that. If everybody understand my example? We also provide provisions for our Eastern Kentucky school districts that's impacted by the storm. These are only applicable to the schools that are in the declaration counties of emergency. It will allow the Commissioner of Education to waive up to 15 student attendance days that are missed, and they shall be applied on a district-wide basis, except the Commissioner of Education may waive additional days on a per-school basis for schools that were closed on days that the closure was not district-wide. It will also provide for 20 remote instruction days if necessary within these school districts, and those remote days can be as limitedly focused as a single group of students. It doesn't have to be countywide. So it provides those as well. It also provides emergency leave for full-time or part-time classified or certified employee, and that is, to use an example provided to me by Chairman Petrie, that is very good, is if one of the teachers maybe have been impacted by the flooding and FEMA is going to be at their house at 11 o'clock and they need to be there to meet with FEMA, then they'll be able to be released to go take care of that emergency and still get paid for that day. So that is that part. Also, we've taken out some of the red tape for the local school boards that they may modify its district facility plan without convening the local planning. And that just cuts out some red tape so they can go ahead and hire contractors and get started on making repairs without jumping through so many hoops. And then the last thing on schools, I will defer to Chairman Petrie to give you the breakdown on that.
I appreciate that. I believe what you're referring to is accommodation on the ADA. If there was a deviation,
That's correct.
Usually if it's more than 10%, we said if there's a deviation of 3% on the ADA decline, then we would make up 2/3 of the resulting effect. And then likewise, a similar type of issue in the West Kentucky, we went to pick up. It has now, the issue has become ripe by time. And we understand that revenue losses have occurred. KDE has informed districts of that, and we will be making up those losses in the form of, once KDE certifies, and there is another process for cities and counties, but as well as the school districts, 100% the first year, and then a 2/3 relief the second year, and a 1/3, and then wean on down. That should accommodate and account for property values picking up over the next few years and the declining need for the assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then Section 12, the final section, is simply the declaration of emergency. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. President.
If I could, Chairman McDaniel, I want to talk about MREs, and you know those well. And my son tells me there's only bad MREs and worse MREs. But truly, when you had roads that were blocked, no electricity, the water was so high at Buckhorn Lake, I don't think you could get back into the Saul area for close to a week after the rain. And I know at Carfork Lake, they were draining off the lake almost constantly for 2 weeks, trying to get it below flood levels, and those roads were cut off. This is kind of the magnitude of it. You know, John Hicks is back here, and I think anybody who's been around this system, I'm not calling John old or anything. He's been around here a while and understands it. No, we were having a discussion with John that the overall scope of this is probably going to be much greater than what happened in Western Kentucky, but we just don't know. Problems are going to happen, and one of the issues that we really can't get to, and it may not be something that we can deal with, that is this concern about debris, be it man-made debris and how to take care of it, but also river debris, natural debris, and who can actually get into rivers to clean it up, because it just sets up the potential in the future of having worse flooding problems if you don't clean that out. But there are certain restrictions based on the federal government, EPA, Army Corps Engineer, Blue Line streams, all the things like that that take place. That's why I just roll these back out to say this is monies to get out into the system, and there may have to be a much bigger, larger discussion as we get more information over the next several months.
Very good. Thank you both very much. Director Hicks and Advisor Adkins obviously have joined us here. I know the governor has spoken at length about this. Is there anything that you guys would like to add at this point?
Here for any questions.
Very good. And Rocky, you've been taking calls around the clock as always, and even more so. We talked about 8 o'clock the other night. I felt like it was late, but I think you were just kind of getting rolling for the day on your day. So appreciate everything that you guys have been doing as well. All right, at this time, any questions? Senator Gibbons.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. President, Representative, thank you for your presentation. Mr. President, for purposes of the West Kentucky changes, you spoke eloquently to the new revenue loss provisions that are being put into the statute as a result of this. And as I understand what we're doing here, we're seeking to address the immediate needs in eastern Kentucky as a result of the flooding, and we're also learning over time about the lingering impact. If you would briefly speak again about the revenue loss, or either of you, or either of our chairmen, speak about the revenue loss model, why we're experiencing that, and then also address the question of the dollars that were budgeted for West Kentucky versus the dollars that have been expended. We have some cushion there, as I understand it, still to provide for these needs.
There was $200 million that was appropriated for the West Kentucky Safe Act. I want to think, and I would have to defer to John, but John Hicks, I think we're at around 65 or 70 million that has been used or awarded. So there's still 130 million approximately that has been not spent, but I don't want people to think it won't be spent, because if there is a reconstruction, you're going to have to do site prep, engineering, design, and then construction. So when you're thinking about a water plant, or I think it was in Graves County that they lost the courthouse, it's going to take time for that to get rebuilt. So they will tap into the fund if FEMA has not made it. As to the assessments, you think about pretty soon you're going to get your tax bill for the current year, and if you pay it ahead of schedule, you get a little bit of a reduction. If you pay it in December, it comes in. That money goes into the system. So for Eastern Kentucky, the money is already in the system. But come next year, and this is what we're seeing this year in West Kentucky, is that improved lot that had a house or business in Bowling Green or in Warren County, your value was made up of your land and your structure. $300,000 was your assessed value of both. Now you only have an unimproved piece of property that is worth $50,000, therefore losing $250,000 of taxable value. So with that, the estimates are around 25 million, and this is in Bowling Green City, 25 million of lost property value because the structure was gone, Warren County, countywide, I think was over 80 million. Has there still been natural appreciation? Yes, there has, of the other unaffected properties. But those properties that were impacted, they have lost countywide over $80 million in taxable value. Therefore, in their budgeting model, they do not have that revenue coming in that would have come in but for the tornado. That's going to be the sequence next year in Eastern Kentucky, but eventually everybody's going to have to sit down and have that discussion about what your future year cash flows are once we get through this next 2 or 3 year period.
Yes, Representative Raymond.
Yeah, thank you. Representative Blanton, I wanted to ask you about a phrase that's used in here that was the same with Western Kentucky, which is that rebuilding really can only be done to the extent of damage directly caused by the storms and flooding. I wanted to understand that better. I've been reading a lot of The Three Little Pigs, and I know that we would want to rebuild the straw house and the stick house with bricks. So does that relate to the type of structure or the materials used?
I'm not sure that I'm following the way you're leading the question. It would lend to the rebuilding of the facilities based on whatever they either previously had or the contractors are saying would need to be utilized to put it back into a usable condition. Does that answer your question?
I know we're not adding new additions to buildings, for example, but can we use the best materials and can we optimize the renovation?
Yes.
I think what you're talking about, this has to be directly related to the impact of the tornado or the flood.
Right.
Some buildings were impacted that part of the building was impacted, but you're not going to be able to claim another part of the building that had no impact from the flood as part of the flood damage. It has to be due to the flood damage. And this is not my first time going through this. And I know Representative Blanton remembers this because before he was my colleague, he was my constituent. And so there was some games played over in a couple of counties when the tornadoes came through Morgan and Magoffin, that they weren't making claim for tornado damage only. They were trying to build into a pricing model more money than what was actually damaged. And I think that's what that language is attempting to preclude.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Meredith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a comment, I guess in anticipation of the session in 2023, I asked Secretary Freelander his assessment of what he saw when he was in Eastern Kentucky. And I asked him how bad it was compared to Western Kentucky. And he said I'd probably use a multiple of 3 to 5 times worse. And he very succinctly mentioned that it's a different type of natural disaster, that tornadoes and floods are entirely two different scenarios, and it may be months before we understand the full impact of the flooding in Eastern Kentucky. So when we come back in January, I think we can realistically expect that we're going to have to make a much larger appreciation of the funds for this. So just want to make that comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Seeing nothing else for the time being, we're going to adjourn the committee. I think both of us are going to be back Friday morning, so members kind of stay attuned. I'm sure your LAs will be in touch, at which point in time we expect to vote. Mr. President, you wanted the last word?
I do want to thank you and the House Chair and the various members that have been on phone calls and conference calls and Zoom meetings, because as you know and both chairs know, I've lost track of how many we've had. Was it Sunday night we were all on a meeting? Monday morning? So the appreciation for everybody's time, I want to make sure it is stated here to this committee and all that are involved, including a lot of staff that was working nights and over these past couple of weekends. So thank you to both chairs and all involved.